This webinar on YouTube as well. We're just live streaming, setting up the live stream over there. All right. Cool. So we have some attendees joining in. Hey, everyone. Glad to have you tune in. Love the enthusiasm. Everybody's joining in before time. I'm all up for learning myself. So I have Patrick here. Patrick, we have some new joinees and some early participants are already here. So cool. Patrick, we'll start the webinar, and this is to let everyone know we'll start the webinar at the designated time. But meanwhile, Patrick, how's your day going? So where are you based off?
I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland, which I don't know how familiar you are with Dublin or Ireland, but it's an incredibly busy place from a technology and software perspective. There are a huge amount of different companies here, like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM. All the really big heavy hitters are here, but there's also like a fairly thriving startup and VC type scene going on as well. Of course, you also have Stripe and other like crazily successful, people coming out of the woodwork here. So it's a fun city, and it's full of good companies and good engineers.
I've heard great reviews. I've heard great things about the city, but never really got a chance to visit it. But probably once I do visit, I'll be sure to catch up with you there. So
cool. Yeah.
So I am particularly based out of India, Delhi, to be particular, in case everybody's aware of. And we would love to know where you are all tuning in from. So by all means, let us know in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. All right. So Patrick, okay, we have Nikhil from Chandigarh. Hey, Nikhil, glad to be here. Glad to have you here. So Patrick, how's the weather there?
It's cold and wet and dark, because that's the way Ireland is in the wintertime. But we look forward to, there'll be some nice, bright, dry day mornings. Like the mornings in the wintertime here tend to be nice, but the evening times are dark and cold. It'll be like that for the next month or two before it starts to brighten up again in the spring.
So I'm more of a winter person. The sweater weather is here in India as well, as you can see. But usually we get very intense summer when it happens. So especially in Delhi, where I'm from, it's always extreme, be it summers or winters. It's not as cold as it is in Dublin, but for me, the tolerance is on the low side, but I love the sweater weather season. So it is here.
Cool.
Yeah. And we also have Ebenezer from UK. Hey, so glad you could make it.
Hey, good evening, Ebenezer.
I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Excuse me if I didn't. So we still have like 3-4 minutes for us to begin with the webinar. We'll just wait for everybody else to tune in, and we'll tune in as well, and then we will start. Meanwhile, guys, go ahead, stay away from pollution, bro. Yeah. Thanks for the heads up, Nikhil. Yeah, the AQI here is ridiculous. So it's actually, we have this festival time that recently came in. It's called Diwali. It's Festival of Lights, apparently, and everybody tries to burn up. So apparently, we're supposed to light up our houses and all, but people, in the name of celebration, we burn a lot of crackers. And it's certainly, it skyrockets the AQI chart here. So the pollution is off the charts, and it takes quite some time for us to recover from that traumatic experience. So, so you can actually feel it now. Post Diwali, you can feel it. Every time you wake up, you have a sore throat, and it's probably because of the AQI. And you have those, thank goodness we have air purifiers to help us with that. But even they sometimes they just end up failing. So probably Nikhil, we're going to get a solution on that over here. Yeah.
Well, I live in a very rural area outside Dublin. We don't really have air pollution here or traffic or people or, we do have broadband though, which means it's possible to work remotely from virtually anywhere in the country. But air pollution, traffic, other people, not things we see on a regular basis.
You're making me very envious by all of this, by the way. I'm not sure if you're doing this on purpose, but yeah, I would love to fly there somehow. Awesome. We have another 2 minutes to go. So meanwhile, for everyone who has joined us, make sure you guys have a cup of coffee ready or a bottle of water with you. This is going to be an hour-long session, as you're already aware. But okay, I see Patrick is already sipping on that. Yeah, he's going to. You'll be doing a lot of talking. So yeah, I have my mug ready, and I'm sure you guys can go ahead and have yours, and we'll be starting off shortly. So. All right, I see attendance count going up. Guys, let us know where you're all tuning in from. It's a global event. We'd love to know all the hands where they're coming in from. So I'm from India. Patrick is from Dublin. Yeah, and yeah. I would love to fly there if I could, but unfortunately that plan has to wait. Patrick has had some great. Okay, Kiran is from Toronto. Hey, Kiran. We have Gabriella from Boston. Hello. Deb from South Florida. Sunny. Okay. From Warsaw, Marieza, Orlando, Atlanta, Netherlands, USA. Oh, we have a very wide audience, it seems. Okay, people are tuning in from everywhere. Romania, Dallas, Canada. Awesome. I am so thrilled to see all of you here, and I hope everybody's doing safe. We're still adapting to the new normal. I hope that you and your loved ones are doing okay. Glad you could all make it for this webinar. Lots of learning coming your way. And having said that, we are 1 minute up the starting time. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen, and probably we can get started. Okay. Patrick, can you confirm if my screen is visible?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's completely visible
awesome.
here.
Awesome. All right, then. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined us for this LambdaTest webinar. Today, we'll be talking about shift left testing, which has been the buzzword in the industry for quite some time now. And I have with me one of the practitioner gurus when it comes to shift left testing, Patrick, and we'll be going about the nitty-gritty of implementation, best practices, and so much more. But before we do that, I would just like to quickly wrap up a few housekeeping items. This session is going to be an hour long, so in case you need to drop off, don't worry, we have this session recorded and it will be shared with you over your registered email address. You can also find the full recording of this webinar and the previous ones over our YouTube channel. So in case you're not already subscribed to LambdaTest, make sure that you do. We roll out extensive tutorials when it comes to test automation space or testing practices in general. Having said that, we would love to hear from you. So during the webinar, if there is anything that you would like to throw towards us, any question, concern, suggestion, anything, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be taking them up towards the end where we have a dedicated Q&A round. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we have. This webinar is also streamed at YouTube at the same time. So if you're tuning us from YouTube, make sure you drop some questions there, and I will make sure that they are being answered. Having said that, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Harshit Paul. I manage product and growth at LambdaTest. And with me today, as I said, I have a pioneer when it, Patrick Walsh, who is a pioneer when it comes to QA domain. Patrick has been in the QA space for more than 20 years now. And currently he's designated as an engineering manager. And Patrick, if you can just go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
All right. So you already got my name, Patrick Walsh. And as Paul mentioned, I've 20 years experience, which will give you some clues to how the minimum age I can possibly be. I started my career really in test position and testing operating systems. I started in localization testing on Windows 2000, which is a very long time ago. And I moved into areas like Windows core networking. I got involved in server and tools and things like 64-bit computing, building some of the early orchestration frameworks and things like that, like before orchestration was really a term that people used. I was in Microsoft for nearly a decade, which was great. And after Microsoft, I moved around a few different places in a few different industries. So I've worked in places like financial services, various startups, spin-offs, real-time e-commerce. Right now, I'm in clinical trial software space with Teckro, which is a small but rapidly growing company in Dublin. So that's the space we're in right now. And I'm really very committed to software quality assurance, shift left approaches, and agile approaches generally. And I love being an engineering manager. It's an absolutely great job. And if you aren't one and you're working in this business, I very much recommend that you give it a go someday. It's a great job to have.
Awesome. Excited to have you here, Patrick. And I'm thrilled, and I'm sure our viewers will be thrilled as well. And having said that, let's quickly hop on to today's agenda. We'll be talking, as I said, in depth about shift left, starting from the very basics. We'll be talking about testing pyramid and why shift left is necessary for, especially if you're an agile driven team, and how it helps to map up with your release velocity, accelerating your test cycles, and catching bugs as early as possible, right? So having said that, we'll also look into some of the best practices to actually implement the shift left, and we'll see how far left is good enough to maximize the benefit out of it, and where exactly does cloud-based automation testing tools can come into picture to help you transition at a faster pace towards the left side of the graph, right? And we'll also talk about some of the workspace practices that you can embed, some mindset changes that you can incorporate to make sure that everybody is in line with the adoption, because it's as I said, it's a buzzword and people are still in the phase of adopting it. So in places where it's a transition is in place, it'll be good to know some of the practices from Patrick directly. So having said that, that is all from my end. I will pass my mic to you now, Patrick, and you can take it from there. Yeah.
All right. We'll kick off. So the presentation that we have for you today, it's relatively high level, but we can dig down into the details as well, especially when we get to the Q&A session, right? So, as I say, the presentation itself is very high level. We're going to cover the basic stuff really, but we can go into any level of depth you want once we get to the Q&A. All right. So, if I cast my mind back a long time ago, right? We might have shipped software every couple of years, or even as infrequently as every 5 years, right? Yeah. And if you went back before that, you didn't have to go much before that when you couldn't actually buy software as a product, right? You got the software with the computer that you bought, typically from somebody like IBM, right? And they expect you to run the computer with the software that it came with, for a decade, right? So that was a really horrible situation and a really horrible experience for people who were customers of software and computer services, right? Because the world changed and your needs changed. They changed a whole lot faster than the software actually changed, right? And in the intervening period, it's gone from like releases every 5 years to 2 years to quarterly releases, right? And now teams release daily or multiple times a day, right? And I think the fastest release cadence of any team that I've been involved with has been about a dozen releases in a day, right? And that means all of the qualification that you used to have months or possibly even years to do, right? Now you have to do it in a time frame that's measured in minutes, right? Very small numbers of errors at the very outside. You still have to be able to ship the software, but you got to be able to do it really, really fast and really, really safely. Right? And the main reason for this is we depend on user feedback to drive our development process today, right? We don't depend, as we used to, on lots and lots and lots of research, lots and lots and lots of planning, massive amounts of specification. We build it all and we hope people will like it and that they'll stick with it for ages. Now what we base our development cycle is real-time user feedback from real users in the real world, right? So we release daily or multiple times a day. We run experiments on our users. We pick the winners and we rinse and repeat. So I think if we can go on to the next slide.
Sure.
So people maybe can shout out in the chat, because I don't know anybody personally who's not familiar with this. This is Mike Cohen's original test pyramid, and I specifically kept it in the extremely boring gray, which I think came in the first time he published it, right? Yeah, and it was presented like this, right? And the point he was making was that in an evolved test practice or approach to software development, you had a lot more unit tests than you had service level tests, and you had a lot more of those than you had UI tests, right? This is it's a meme at this point. It's an established, and I hope generally very well understood picture of, the relative amounts of each type of testing that you need to do, right? And unit tests typically, it obviously depends on the software project. It depends on the size of the project, but there are going to be an order of magnitude more of those than there are of your service tests. They're thereabouts, maybe even 2 orders of magnitude, but somewhere in between those limits. And then at the UI level, you have far fewer tests than you'll be applying at the service level. Now, you can automate all of these, right? You're probably still going to have exploratory testing, manual testing at the UI level. There are things machines cannot do, right? They can't assess the usability of a piece of software, right? They can't go, well, this flows right, or, feels really good on my mobile phone, right? Machines can't make those assessments, right? You can measure, if you do your really fast releases, you can measure user interactions and you can crunch the data, right? But you still, there is still a place for user testing. There is still a place for having a piece of software in your hand. There is still a place for the designers that we have in the universe, right, who actually try to design stuff that looks and feels well in advance. But in terms of the number of tests and the amount of time that you spend, authoring them, unit tests right at the start of the pipeline, there's going to be hundreds or thousands of those, depending on, or even tens if you have a really tiny project. Service level tests, fewer of those, and at the user interface layer, presuming your project is a thing that has an actual user interface, fewer again. So I don't know, maybe people can vote out in the chat panel just to see where you are, right? Is this how you guys are set up today? No?
Yeah. No such shout in the chat window as such. We're clear.
All right. Well, we can move on to the next slide anyway.
Awesome.
So this is what I'm going to describe as shift right testing. And I've encountered this and experienced this really quite recently, at least within the last 5 years, right? Yeah. In large scale, actually in large scale implementations, particularly in older, well-established industries that are not software companies as their primary purpose, but where software is part of the business. Yeah. Okay. And the shift right approach we move more and more and more work to the right-hand side of the development cycle, closer to the actual release part, right? And this is typically the things that you tend to see on the ground are QA engineers aren't involved in assessing the requirements or examining the requirements, right? They aren't necessarily asked to produce estimates around how they test. At the development cycle, there may not be a whole lot of unit or integration tests. If you are able to measure this in your organization and visualize it, there are tools like SonarQube, which will tell you if you have them plugged into your build system, if you have one. And like in a modern, well-organized, very well-maintained code base that has a unit test framework, north of 80% coverage is good, right? There are conditions where you might legitimately not have coverage levels that high, but you certainly don't want to see coverage levels of like 5% or 15% or 25%, right? Like those kind of numbers just mean that a job is not being done consistently at that level. And the reason why you're really interested in this is because this is going to be the cheapest, fastest, most reliable test you can ever write. Yeah, it's going to do a really good job of verifying one thing, that this piece of code works, right? It works for the base case at the very least. And the practical impact of that speed and the visibility that you can have into your code base of which bits are covered or not is a code base which has high levels of unit tests is far easier to change rapidly than a code base that doesn't, right? You can change it much more quickly and you can change it much more safely, right? After the development section, back in the bad old days, and I think still in some parts of the industry, you'd have armies of testers, like very large numbers of testers. And the reason why you needed very large numbers of testers is because your testing was mostly manual, right? So I had to spend a lot of time doing it. It was very slow. You have to repeat the testing because when the new build comes out, you got to go test again and you need the same people again and they have to do the same things again, right? Which, I mean, I'm not sure how many of you have been in this. I was a manual tester once, right? Okay. I was a predominantly manual tester for about 2 years in the early part of my career. I would not particularly want to spend 10 years, doing that, particularly on a long-lived software project. You can imagine what that might do to you if you spend 10 years on a project as a manual tester. So you needed loads and loads of these guys, and they start getting really expensive. And, think about it when you have to deploy to lots of different platforms. There are platform-specific issues, right? Think about it when you bring in things like localization, right? And you localize into 20 different languages, right? The scale of the cost explosion in terms of your testing here is ridiculous, and it stays with you forever because you got to test with every release. And even if you don't release, you might still have to test because the world around your software changes. Yeah. And even after all of this effort, when you release your software, the users are still going to find bugs, right? Because it really does not matter how many people you throw at this problem, right? This type of approach is not going to get you to a place where you can reliably release quality software, right? It's just not an effective enough approach. So we can move on to the next slide, I think.
Sure.
So if we take a shift left approach, right, which is hopefully what we're all thinking about here today, the release process still works in the same direction. It goes from requirements through development and testing through to the release, right? But the first point is you're going to make sure you get everybody on the team involved in analyzing and reviewing and pulling apart the requirements right at the start. Everybody is involved right at the start of the process here. So this is the first piece that you've actually moved left, right? The testers and QA people who previously might not have even seen the software before or heard about it even in some cases before it's released to your staging test environments. They have to be involved right at the start, right? Okay. They absolutely have to be involved right at the start. And part of the reason they're involved right at the start is not just so that they understand what's coming, but it's to pull apart the requirements, right? To see if they're testable, to see if there are requirements problems. And the other thing is potentially to introduce requirements, right? Okay. Testers and QA people can introduce requirements which make the software easier to test, right? And if you're taking a longer term view about this, the testability of your software and designing and architecting your software and implementing your software to make it specifically to make it easier to test, given the scale of the investment that you're going to have to put into that one way or another, is something you need to consider at requirements and design time. Yeah. Once you move into the development phase, you're going to see vast numbers of unit tests on any software project of any kind of reasonable size, right? And the developers typically write the unit tests, always, in fact, right? And what you're doing there is you're moving work, right, that used to sit with the army of manual testers you had before, right? You're moving that work and you're implementing it in a different way, right? You're implementing it at a microscopic level format in the form of unit tests, right? And you're also doing integration tests. Typically speaking, you're also doing integration tests which operate at the service level. Lots and lots of those. And you want automation engineers or software development engineers who've moved into tests to write those tests for you, right? You are not going to need as many of those people as you needed before, right? You're not going to need the army of testers before, right, that you had before, but you are going to need more highly technically skilled people at this stage. And the developers are going to have more work to do, at least in the first instance, or if you haven't been doing this previously, that's what they're going to tell you. You know, now we have to write unit tests. There's more work involved for us, right? And that's a true statement. The very first time you do it, like, it is literally more work, but they will be able to work faster on average because the number of builds that come back and get bounced back from test, and the slow feedback loop you used to have previously, where, you know, bugs might be discovered a week after a build gets into test, or a couple of days after a build gets into test. Now those bugs are going to be found typically within minutes of the build running. You know, integration tests can take longer to run, but it's not going to be the next day or the day after or a week later or 3 weeks later. You're going to have the results of those tests within a very short period of time, when the piece of code or the place where that problem was introduced is still in context for the developers who are working on it. And they can go, that was that change right there that caused this problem. We can go and fix that straight away. We're not going to have to do some massive in-depth investigation to figure out where it was because the code change that caused this problem was introduced a month ago. No, the code change that caused the problem was introduced 2 hours ago, or an hour ago, or 40 minutes ago. Now we know what it is and we can go and fix it straight away, right? So we're moving work that used to be carried out by manual testers at the third stage here back into development, because unit tests, it's development. Integration tests, that's development. UI automation, that's also development, right? And one of the things in particular about UI automation that you want to take a look at is quite a few organizations that I've looked at previously started work on their UI automation after the software came to the test environments, right? Okay, now this doesn't help you, right? Well, it does help, but it's not an optimal situation, right? The work on the test automation of all kinds should start with the development work, right? So to the greatest degree possible, your integration tests and your UI automation are ready to roll in lockstep, sometimes in really good organizations, even before the code is ready. So you can literally validate your code against the tests. Build passes and you're good. And in this situation, once you get into the test phase, people automatically start to find more things for your testers to do, right? They can spend more time on exploratory testing, things like that affect the user experience, examining extreme edge cases, right? Finding bugs that are hard to find if you have testers who are talented in exploratory testing, instead of having to find all the bugs, now you can get real value out of them by getting them to find the bugs that are hard to find and that really matter to you, right? Other things they can do is you can start looking at things like performance testing, stress testing, scalability. You start to pay more attention to the things you always should have been doing, but probably weren't, like your telemetry, tracing, and logging, right? So when you have problems with your systems, you've people who are in a position to actually action those because they're familiar with those areas, because this is now what their job is about, right? The job has changed here, right? It's important to understand that you've moved a lot of work from one part of the development cycle to another, literally moved it, but also the jobs of the people involved in this process have changed. Now, even after you do all of that and release your software, users might still report bugs, okay? But you're going to be able to release a lot more quickly. You're going to be able to adapt to your users' requirements, and it's typically way cheaper, right? If you're ever in a position to measure this, right, to do a side-by-side comparison, like for like, which is not something people typically get to do outside of, you know, major companies that run research on this. If you're ever in a position to actually measure the difference on the same code base, you will be shocked at the difference in cost that you're going to encounter here. Like, the shift left approaches that we're describing here are going to cost you a tiny fraction of the previous kind of traditional historical approaches that came before. Like, it's going to be measured in, like, every situation is different, but I have measured costs here before at about 15%. Not only did you get the faster release cycle, higher quality, the automation teams found 100% of the bugs that were found by the manual teams, right? In a turnaround time of about 15 minutes instead of 3 weeks, right? So that's just one example from my own personal experience here.
Wow.
Like, dramatically good results can be seen here. It does depend. Your mileage varies depending on the situation, right? And that was with about 30% of the staff as well. So your mileage can vary, but it will virtually always be cheaper and faster to take this type of approach. So if you possibly can, you should. And we'll move on just a bit.
Sure. So before we do that, it just looks like, you know, it'll be better to address this question here now that we are on the slide. So we have this question from Yusuf, and it says, how can you automate while you don't have a stable build to test on the UI front?
This is to validate your actual tests, right? Is what you're talking about here. Like, you can run the test against the build will fail, right? Which is what it's supposed to do, right? Yeah, your tests work. It's been a while since I've actually implemented UI testing myself, but this was my experience at the time, if I'm thinking back. You write the tests to the degree that you can. And for UI testing, typically we were focusing on the happy path with a very limited number of side cases. And the build is going to stay red until the UI passes. Now, as long as you know what components are there, you have good ways to get IDs to the components, which you'll have arranged with your developers earlier in the process. So as long as you're capable of actually writing stable tests, the build is going to fail until the build is ready to pass. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Let us know, Yusuf. Otherwise, we'll take it towards the end of the webinar. All right. I will move to the next slide. Yeah.
Go on. Okay. So we're talking about how you want to start doing this, right? And I mean, we have a huge audience here, and there are all kinds of different organizations. So you really want to be very careful about grounding yourself in where you are right now today. Excuse me. Something I've seen kind of repeatedly in shift left adoption and agile approach adoption is there are minimal basic requirements or prerequisites before you try to do this. It's not something you can just do, right? You do need to have a plan, and you do need to have an understanding of what's achievable inside your own environment. So if you're dealing with a massive legacy distributed system, which runs like thousands of batch processes, and big old banking systems would be a reasonably good example of that. These are hard things to apply shift left approaches to, right? But within that environment, you're going to find there will be components that you will be able to apply these approaches to. There will be components, integration components, integration points in your architecture that are easier to approach from a shift left perspective. And they also give you access to other things in your environment. Things like gateways, BFFs if you're in microservices architecture, other integration points for places where you can start to write automated integration tests that talk to legacy systems, right? If you're brand new in an absolutely greenfield site with no code to worry about yet, this kind of thing is way easier to do. You build the build system first, always, right? Everybody I know in every startup I've ever seen, especially with the ones with the really experienced engineers who know exactly what to do, they still don't build the build system first, right? They still don't. Everybody wants to dive straight into the code and start doing stuff on their own local machine now, because they really, really want to get the code done. So even in the best possible scenario, right, people still do the wrong thing and then kick themselves for it a few weeks later, right? But get your tool chain sorted as early as possible, right? As early as you possibly can in the process. Get your CI/CD system sorted. Get your environment sorted. Use infrastructure as code. Like those technologies, they exist now in reasonably easily accessible formats, which was not the case even a little bit more than a decade ago, right? They were not really easily approachable, right? So these things are available to you now. So if you're lucky enough to be in a greenfield site environment, put the effort in right at the start and get that stuff sorted out. If you're in a larger kind of mixed environment, run your pilot project against the smallest thing you can possibly find, right? This will help you to prove out your approach in something that isn't too complicated, and hopefully give you an opportunity to get your management on board with the approaches you're describing. Like as an engineering manager in software and dealing with a lot of business people in different types of companies, sometimes it's going to be really, really easy, right? They're just going to be on board, right? Yeah, there'll be infinite amounts of money and infinite amounts of time, and it's going to be a great project, and everybody's going to be happy, and they go, "Way, off you go, run with it," right? Yeah. And other times they're going to go, "What you want to do that for?" They're going to be harder to convince. And if they're harder to convince, find the smallest possible project, right? Okay, the smallest possible project, the smallest possible outlay, the lowest possible risk. Run a demo, right? And if you get good results, run it side by side against one of the other teams in your organization. Don't make them look bad. That's not nice, right? But engage with them and bring them along with the ride for you, because even the small wins here will add up, right? You'll start to get a coalition behind you. You will find the other people within your organization who've been very quiet for a while, who really wanted to do this. You can get them on board and build some momentum behind this initiative that you're running. Now, that's typically the case of where it's a grassroots type initiative, run by QA people, initiated by QA people, initiated by developers who want to do the right thing. If it's being pushed from the top down, try and find a technical manager in your organization who really understands the challenges here, right? Hunt like mad. If you're in a bigger organization, and they tend to be the ones that do big top-down initiatives, right? If it's been driven by very business-centric management who don't have a detailed on-the-ground understanding of the practical challenges with doing something like this, ask around and find somebody who does. You're going to need backup in explaining the level of change that is going to be required in your organization, right? Because in bigger organizations with bigger legacy code bases, it's really challenging. You want to pick your targets carefully where you are going to have a positive ROI, where it is going to make a difference. And you might decide that some of your systems are not worth approaching, right? They're not worth remediating. You'll manage them the way you have done forever. Ensure there's visibility into your projects. Shout about your successes, right? Demonstrate them. Like in a few rather large companies I've been in and observed, and other organizations, even some governmental ones, people don't always shout about their technical successes. You know, you really need to raise the roof on these things. Raise your own profile within whatever company you're in. Draw attention to your successes, right? They will be repeated. If you don't, they might fall by the wayside and never be approached again, right? But ensure there's visibility. Bring people in. Bring your management with you if it's a grassroots thing. If it's top down, make sure you demonstrate the results in a way your stakeholders understand, right? Try to understand their priorities. Try to understand what they're after. Present your results in a way that they understand. Now, within the organization, you got to adapt your reward systems. One of the things I've noticed repeatedly is engineers are not necessarily rewarded for writing quality code, right? Yeah. In fact, it's quite rare, right? I might be probably not the only engineering manager I know. Does everybody have like goals, annual goals or quarterly goals, and you have 5 of them, and you know they have to make sense, but it takes quite a bit of effort to figure out exactly what goals you should have and where they make sense and everything else. Yeah, right. Okay, I nearly always have one around code quality, right? So when you get to review time, you know, there's a goal that says I will deliver code that passes our linters, you know, that has coverage, right? Where we have integration tests for it, right? These things, you know, people are logical, people are rational, right? They'll do the things that you reward them for, and they won't do the things that you don't reward them for. They certainly won't do things you punish them for, right? Yeah. So make sure your reward system within your business rewards quality delivery, like explicitly, right? You know, if you want to get the highest marks in your review, you have to have knocked out the quality objectives, right? Okay, you will not get that bonus if you haven't. If you didn't make that one, sorry, the bonus goes to somebody else, right? Harsh but true, right? And this is not just for engineers, right? And this is really important. You cannot make quality and you cannot make shift left implementations just the thing the people on the ground are responsible for, right? Like that's not fair. It's not reasonable. Has to apply to management, both engineering management, product management, right? We're supposed to be optimizing everything about the way we do our work for the benefit of the businesses that we work for, right? And an optimized result means that everybody is on the same page. It means engineering management, product management, and everybody else gets assessed with at least overlap on key agreed approaches like this. So quality, shift left approaches. Because if that's not the case, you'll find a situation where you want to do the things that you're supposed to be rewarded for. One part of your management structure is saying, no, we don't want to do that because we have to do this thing instead, because that's what's important to me, right? You have to work for that alignment to make sure that alignment exists within your business and within your own management structures, so that people are on the same page and are pulling in the same direction. Otherwise, it's people on the ground who get pulled in different directions, and it really doesn't tend to work out for very well. And the final thing I would say is, if you're working within a regulated industry, you're probably going to need to adapt your formal processes as they exist today to support this shift left approach. Like, if you have a lot of SOPs, if you have a lot of things that you tend to be audited against, and regardless of the industry you're in, you're probably audited against your own procedures, which you've defined to meet some industry standard, right? Yeah. So if you want to change your on-the-ground process and implement a very, very much shift-left approach and very high levels of automation, don't keep your existing formal processes, right? They'll act as a layer on top of your existing process. Sorry, your existing formal processes will act as a layer on top of your new process, and you end up having to do both, right? Which is a real mess, right? Because you're doing one thing because it's the right thing to do, and you're doing another thing because it's the thing you need to do to meet some regulatory requirement because you have some SOP that says that's what you need to do, right? So adapt your formal processes so they meet your ideal target shift left approach, right? There's absolutely no problem with this. In the case of things like PCI compliance, which I've been involved with recently, we defined our acceptance criteria on a business level as a certain minimum level of code coverage. Yeah. Okay. Our previous audits used to involve looking at JIRA tickets, taking evidence, we did this, we did that, and the other thing, and piles of documentation, right? Where's your acceptance criteria? Did you meet them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, we don't want any of that anymore. We redefined our own internal standards, said our acceptance criteria are must pass the linters, must pass the automated vulnerability scanning, must have a minimum level of code coverage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all the checks are automated and it's still fully standards compliant, right? The auditors you might need to argue with your auditors a little bit and walk them through it, but it's perfectly legitimate approach. There's no reason not to go that way, but be sure to be ready to adapt your formal processes if you're going down this route. And we can move on just a little bit, I think.
Yeah, just to roll you back onto the previous point, which happened to be very interesting, where you talked about, keeping in place a reward system, right? Just to keep everyone motivated on the same page. A lot of us, when we talk about shift left, it's imperative that, our QAs are in sync with the dev side, right? Because we want to have that kind of, synergy right from the beginning, right? We want to have those code review sessions where both the teams are involved at the same time, right? And this is just my opinion. Like, I've been a QA myself in the past, and it can be a little intimidating for, from a QA perspective, or it can, some might feel it, I don't know, it might look like a drag to somebody that, should I really be doing this? So how do you make sure that as a culture, that everybody is adapting to it? I mean, even if you convince the higher ups, what about the folks who are a part of your team? How do you make sure that they blend in well, your QA and dev? Do you have some practices in place that you've adopted, some common work sessions to get this thing kickstarted?
Well, I think the first part is not everybody is going to be interested, right? Okay, right? If you're operating at sufficient scale, there's always going to be some people who aren't interested, that it's really not their gig, right? Okay, yeah. And you got to accept that. But like 80 or 90% of the people will be, right? Benefits for QA people engaging in this kind of effort are typically around their ability to upskill and move into automation if they haven't done so already, right? If they're already in automation, they can move into things like telemetry and monitoring systems and start creeping into the DevOps space, which is, the most highly remunerated subsection of our business today, right? With massive levels of demand, right? So it isn't like there's a hard sell required here, right? Yeah, the basic value proposition for QA people in a shift left environment is, you're going to get to do perhaps more challenging things, right? Because no matter how far left you start at, we're going further left is the proposition, right? So you're going to be doing more challenging things, hopefully more interesting things that are better for your career, are going to give you a longer lifespan and make you more money. Those things are virtually always true in this scenario, right? From a QA perspective, and also from a developer perspective, but especially I think from a QA perspective. So it's usually not tough to, persuade people to engage with this kind of thing who are involved in QA, right? It really is an open door for opportunities for people in the QA space who want to develop personally and both in career terms, right? If this is happening in your business and you're from a QA background, like, jump on that train, right? Get going.
Yeah, so we just have this one question. So from Soumya in the chat window, and it says, is shift left just about staying true to Agile methodology?
They're related, right? So shift left is more specifically from lean, right? Now agile and lean approaches are closely related, right? But they're not quite the same, yeah. So even before you had widespread adoption of agile methodologies in software development, you had attempts to implement lean approaches, right? Which go, I mean, they have similar roots, right? Back in the Toyota production system and all that stuff from ages and ages ago, if people are familiar with those things. So do you need to do it to be agile? I think virtually always, but not necessarily, right? If you're one of those kind of hyper agile companies who's into what's sometimes referred to as fragile development, think about the early days of Twitter, right? Nobody ever cared if it broke. They still became massive. I hope I'm not being unfair to anybody from Twitter there, right? But you know, there's an extreme version of fragile development which says we don't care if it works or not, get it out there and see if customers like the concept, right? Okay, and that has very high levels of validity, right? But it's kind of an edge case, right? Otherwise, in virtually all agile approaches, you do need to do this, right? Like XP, if you go all the way back to XP, you write tests for everything all the time, right? You write automated tests for everything, for like every case. It's not like you do the happy path. It's not like you just do, you know, the minimum number of unit tests. It's like you work out every possible code path through the application. There's no such thing as negative testing because every possible outcome is something that you've thought about and written a test for, right? Everything is a positive result. Every outcome is expected and you have a test for it. And when the build passes, you go, right? So they're closely related. You nearly, I mean, the vast majority of cases, you need these types of approaches to be agile. And the further left you go, the more agile you can be.
Yeah, and I guess because at the end of the day, the goal is pretty much common, right? You need to be faster at the end of the day, right? With your, be it your release cycles, be it the test velocity, right? And I think incorporating shift left it's just like adding fuel to the fire if you're doing it with the agile things, right? Because you're making sure that everything is accelerating at the rate without compromising on the quality front. So many times, if you catch the bugs early in early phases, and that way you're agile. At the same time, you're able to mitigate the risk that you might encounter later down the stages, right? So I think it's just the best of both worlds.
I mean, the big, like a really effective implementation, you're going to find that it's very rare for work to come back to dev from test before release, right? Like the actual tail end of the process on the right side of the process is really just about confirmation testing. It's almost a box ticking exercise before you push the stuff to production. And hopefully your QA engineers, or at least somebody from your team, has their eyes on the telemetry as the release goes live, looks to see if anything changes. They're familiar with what the application looks like when it's running in production. But it's a straight run through the environments once you get out of dev. The rest of it is really just going to be confirmation testing.
Got it. So I'll just shift to the next slide then.
Okay, so best practices. In my experience to date, I don't think there's such a thing as going too far left. Like people have asked me, how much shift left do you need to do, right? Yeah. It's always more than whatever you have today, right? Just try and find the smartest next thing to do. It's very rarely something you stop doing, right? Now, you do eventually run into declining returns with it, right? Okay. And you'll know that when you hit it. But the next time you want to put another tweak into your environment automation or smoke tests or performance tests or anything else, and you think, you know what, this is real overkill right now. I'm running out of ways to think of new ways to make this process slicker, faster, more reliable, or more comprehensive. If that's where your head is, right? If you run stress tests on your build and deployment systems, just to make sure that they never ever break, right? If you're in that space, then probably you don't have much more useful that you can do here, right? But if you're anywhere else, you should go as far left as you can with as much of the work as you can, as fast as you can. And if you're not already putting a lot of time and effort into your reviews, for example, which is right at the start, and I don't just mean code reviews, requirements reviews, then code reviews when you actually get into coding, then you should, right? If you're not doing code reviews at all, you definitely should be, right? You should be looking at your linters, or, do you have a CI system? Do you have linters? Do you have unit tests? We'll go right back to the start and look at the stuff right at the start. Because the whole point behind this is there isn't a whole lot to be gained if you do a whole lot more testing at the UI level and you're not doing code reviews, right? Like that just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I mean, it provably doesn't make any sense. It's going to be slower. It's going to be slow feedback loops. It's going to cost you more money, right? So, do not do these things. Start right at the start. Look at the very first steps in your process before you look at the things on the right-hand side of the graph. Are you doing the things that should be on the left? If you are, all good, keep doing them. Examine how effective you think they are, right? Don't sit on your laurels. Like, it's important if you're really thinking about continuous improvement, once you have what you think is a good basic process in place, like, don't stop there. Re-examine every element of it on a regular basis. If you don't think there's any value in it, in some part of it, get rid of it. If you think it can be improved and add more value, improve it, right? But don't ever stay still, right? When you're talking about design and architecture, you really do, if you haven't done it already, start thinking about design and architect for testability, right? It doesn't often require massive changes to the way you architect your systems to make them dramatically more testable. It does sometimes, right? And sometimes it's even worth doing when there's a lot of effort in it, right? Like, you might completely change an API design to make it more testable. If you're not estimating test development and test time right now, this is something almost shockingly common. If you're not doing that right now, you really need to do it. There's no way you can know that you're going to be able to actually implement the tests that you want to implement, that you think you need to implement, that will help your business to be faster and more efficient, if you don't actually estimate that effort. And a high proportion of places I've been through in the last decade or so are in a place where testing has been a time-boxed, resource-limited phase in the development process, where testers and QA people basically have to do whatever they can within a particular resource envelope, right? And this is absolutely the wrong way to do it, right? You plan and estimate that work. And if you don't have the resources or the time for the work, it means you have too much work and you need to do less work or get more time or get more resources, right? These approaches do not work with the kind of, you've got 2 weeks to test something, go test it, right? You've got 10 people to test it, go test it. You step back a bit, treat your testing just like you treat every other part of your development process. Get people to give you estimates and don't overburden them. Don't give them more work than can be reasonably achieved within the time frame that you've got. If you've got too much work, you got to arrange less work. That's it. Define your non-functional requirements, right? This is still a tough one for me. It's very rare for me to see non-functional requirements defined up front. Yeah. And the amount of arguments I have with people about, we've got this fancy new, performance test framework that we built. We built it, we tested it, we integrated it into the CI system. It will now assert if our performance numbers are wrong, so our red, green build thing will all work, and we won't ship something to production unless the performance and scalability all works right. We've done it all, right? And then you're like, yeah, well, we actually have no idea what our performance requirements are, right? All that was a waste of time, right? you've got to put time and effort, convince your product people, convince your engineering management, right? Make up their mind and figure out what their performance requirements are, right? Do some research if necessary, right? It is possible to answer these questions. So other things that can help you, like tools like SonarQube, the OWASP scanner plugins, you should integrate that stuff into your build system if you haven't. Performance testing. We have other vulnerability scanning tools. There's a whole range of them out there that you can integrate into your CI system. Now, some of these things will, if you lay them all into your regular build, it's really going to make your build slow down. So in plenty of cases, you might want to split that stuff out. There are things like the vulnerability scanning tools, the performance testing, if you actually have the capability of integrating in your pipelines, load testing, anything else off the top of my head, those are the ones I would normally split them out from the main build, right? Because they take too long to run. I might even split out the integration testing as well, depending on how much of it there is and what kind of infrastructure I have. Because if you have a lot of integration tests, they can take a lot of time to run, and or you might end up spreading your agents out over a lot of different machines to get them to run within an acceptable time frame, right? So you can prioritize those things and run different builds if you need to. Now that creates slightly different problems in that you get sprawl in the build system, but vulnerability scanning tools, you probably do not need to run those with every single build, right? The source code level ones, the ones that check for the NSIT and OWASP vulnerabilities, they don't need to run with every build. They can run every day, and you might run on every build that you plan to release, right? Or they can run every week, maybe, depending on where you are and your risk appetite and every so often. But in order to keep the build fast and keep it running over, you might want to strip some of these things out of the build that runs every day and possibly have more than one. But talk to your DevOps guys if you have DevOps guys, talk to your engineers if those things happen within the engineering teams. You can be sensible about this. Make the build system work for you and keep the build time fast. Like faster is always better. Like literally always better. There's no minimum number there. That's a perfect number other than 0. But for teams working together, I usually try to set a ceiling of about 20 minutes, including the integration tests, which is a hard target if you have a lot of integration tests. It's very hard to reach if you have UI tests because they're slower again. So you got to split these things out and try and keep the build fast. And remember, automate almost everything, right? Any piece of software you write today, it's probably still going to be around in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You know, it might morph and evolve over that time. Hopefully it does. If you're in a busy modern environment, you're going to be doing a lot of releases. You're going to be doing a lot of testing. Like the amount of test cycles you're going to get to are going to be so high, you're not going to be worth counting them, right? So automate everything you possibly can, because anything you don't automate, you're going to be doing it again and again and again and again. And, you know, people are expensive, you know, salaries are expensive. I don't know anybody who wants to do anything more than once, like personally, right? And if you possibly can, invest in your automation, because you will be doing this literally forever. You know, don't think about the cost of 1 test cycle or 2 test cycles or, you know, the test cycle for the quarter. Think about the fact that you will be doing the same thing again and again and again and again, possibly for years, in most cases for years, right? And remember, like further left is nearly always better, cheaper, and faster, right? My favorite example of this is Git. Git, because you merge local before you get to push your changes, right? Git forces a shift left approach to merging code changes. We can move on to the next one if you like.
Yep.
And here's where we talk about the infrastructure, because I was going on about the infrastructure earlier. Like infrastructure sprawl and testing is kind of nuts at this stage. And I would say if you're attending this webinar, you're probably not an infrastructure company, right? And you don't necessarily want to build a small data center in some part of your company to run your builds and to run your test automation, right? And hire people specifically to manage that, because that is what you will end up doing if that's the route you choose to take, right? And it's very hard to get, all of the browser combinations, all of the device combinations, if you're a consumer level retail software vendor, right? So loads of different major players will provide you with some kind of CI tooling setup, right? They'll give you resources on demand, pay for them when you use them and when you don't. And when you're working out the comparison between those services and running these things on-prem, add in bandwidth, add in electricity, right? Add in salaries, right? Because all of these things, like it's not just the cost of a rack of servers in a corner somewhere, if you even manage to get hold of those, right? That's only one part of it. That stuff needs to be managed, and the salaries of people who manage that kind of thing, they tend to be quite high in our industry today. So work out the total cost of ownership of your on-prem solutions before you go and consider cloud services. I think this is where I hand over to you, Paul. You're going to tell them about the cloud services that you guys provide.
Definitely. Thanks, Patrick, for building the base here. And it's, as you said, right, unless you're an infrastructure provider yourself and you're delivering a business online, it becomes really challenging to set up, everything in-house or, purchase a particular device lab. And it's not just about, as Patrick pointing out, buying the devices, but it is also about, having resources being put up to manage them, right? So you have DevOps professionals or somebody from the team who's managing the entire device farm and lab, right? And that all in all can turn out to be quite, cost heavy when you look at it on a broader scale, right? And that is why you need a faster and better way to test, and that is where LambdaTest comes in. So what is LambdaTest? We basically offer a cross-browser testing cloud. It is, you can consider LambdaTest as a test execution platform where you can come up and plug your automation scripts to run it across 2,000 plus browsers, right? Be it Selenium or Cypress, any testing framework that you are thinking of, and not just testing in automation, but also for manual side of things. So there are edge cases when you can't test your website across all of these browser variety that you have on board, right? You can't really control which your customers, they can visit your website from pretty much any device out there, but what you can control is how your UI is rendering in front of them, and you don't want to disappoint the customers at the end of the day, right? So ensuring that your UI stays intact and compatible irrespective of where your users are tuning in from. It's very imperative for any business that is running online, right? And LambdaTest helps to make that task easier for you to validate that your cross-browser testing coverage is on point and that your website is up to the mark. We do that by offering automation testing, as I said, Selenium and Cypress. It's pretty easy to plug in your Selenium and Cypress script. You need to make a few lines of code and you can run it on any browser that we have on board, right? We also offer live testing, which is more or less like manual testing. You can deep dive into a cloud-based machine and interact your website over, be it Chrome browser on a Windows 11 or a Safari browser on Mac OS, any version, right? And we have a very interesting tool, which is LT Browser, that helps you build responsive web apps faster. Make sure you try that in case you haven't. And we also offer screenshot testing, which allows you to capture full page screenshots across different browsers and compare them virtually. We have 2,000 plus browsers, over 500,000 user base so far, 100 plus integrations on board. We offer 24/7 technical support to make sure that you are up to the task for you're up to the timelines and you're not skipping the deadlines at any point. We offer lifetime free product access. So in case you have not already tried Lambda, just make sure that you go out and sign up to it. And having said that, I'm just going to be mindful about the time. I'll just quickly showcase how the platform looks like. And thereon, we'll just hop into the Q&A real quick. So this is actually the real-time testing, as I was talking about, the live testing. You can pretty much insert any URL here and select from a dozen of browsers. just open any particular machine, and it will just be a matter of seconds. And you have, for example, I'm using a Windows, right? So it's not feasible. It's not possible for me to test on Safari if I have a Windows machine on me. But with LambdaTest, it's just a couple of, it's just a matter of few seconds, and I can pretty much roll in, get a machine online and see how my website will be rendering there, right? One thing we do to accelerate as we talk about, enabling QA and devs at the same time is this feature, which is called Mark as Bug. So when you're testing, you can pretty much go ahead, highlight wherever the UI bug you find, and you can just launch it from here, right? So we have integrations across, a variety, a catalog of products. We have integrations with project management tools like Jira, communication tools like Slack, and we have integrations with codeless automation tools, and of course, CI/CD tools to help you plug in your automation scripts with your CI/CD pipeline and to empower you with continuous testing. So let me just, so if you just go ahead and mark a bug over here, it'll just take, and it says that bug marked successfully. And just like that, I don't need any email chain or anything. I logged the bug straight away from my testing platform right to the project management, and it got assigned to one of the devs. So this is how the live testing looks like. Coming back to the automation front, which is critical when we're trying to shift left, because we want to cover as much as we can. As Patrick said it repeatedly, we don't want to repeat the same thing again and again and again, right? And automation helps with that, taking the load off when it comes to regression testing. So I have a Selenium sample here, Cypress test. I'll just quickly go ahead and showcase the advantage you get from running it on cloud, right? So first of all, you get an entire video recording of the test session. So you don't need to, in case there are always these debates, right, where you have a QA reporting that this is breaking for me, but it worked for the dev on their side, right? And a lot of things need to capture there, and there are Slack threads going on and forth, right, and going back and forth. And you can pretty much avoid that if you have a video as a proof in place, and it captures the metadata as to which browser system, screen resolution, or operating system was used here. You can look into the exception side of things in case you ever come across any exceptions. Fortunately for me, I'm a rusty tester, but still I was able to get the simple test pass, so I don't have any exceptions on this side. You can enable a command capability while declaring the test as LambdaTest, and what that will do is capture every command that gets executed. The log will be generated over here and captured separately, right? And that way you can pretty much capture screenshots and mark a bug from here as well, as we saw in the real-time testing. So it will open up the similar form, and you can mark the bug from here as well to just figure out the exact command which is failing in your automation side. You can go ahead and look into the network side of things. Network logs, I have not passed the capability here, so they're not loading, but you can pretty much look into how the network is responding if this capability was passed through, right? Similarly, there are other logs over here. These are raw Selenium logs. In case you need to dig down into the nitty-gritty of it, no matter which framework you're using, you can dig down into the raw Selenium code that gets executed over here. We have a metadata tab, which allows you to get the Hawkeye level view of pretty much everything, be it test ID, browser name, build name, anything that you need to just quickly have a look at and categorize things, right? I won't take much of the time. The powerful feature, the most powerful thing about using LambdaTest as your go-to platform for testing is this part, right? So which is parallel testing. So what it basically does is this counter tells me how many sessions I'm able to run in parallel, right? And that really helps teams to chop down their overall test execution time by multiple folds, right? So I, for example, have 5 parallel sessions, out of which, since I'm not running any tests right now, it is displaying as 0. But I can run 5 tests in one go, and that chops down my time by, I'm very bad at maths, but yeah, but by a lot of time, right? I'm able to save up a lot of time in there, right? And having said that, if you go to the capability side of things, the capability generator here, this will actually allow you to, this will enable you to have a look at all the capabilities you have when it comes to running tests on LambdaTest. So you can figure out a list of browsers, operating systems that you need, any capability on the APM side, Selenium side, any browser specific capability, whether you want to run it in headless mode. You can look at a variety of, you can choose from a variety of countries in case, for example, as Patrick talked about, if you're in retail or similar sort of businesses where you are implementing localization on a heavy regard, right? You would want to see how that messaging is coming across. And in case you want to do that, changing your IPs directly from here is one of the features that you can leverage. And as I said, network log, which was by default passed as false. If you just turn this to true, network capabilities will start getting captured as well. So by all means, I won't take much of the time here since we're already past the designated time. I'll stop sharing my screen. By all means, go ahead, deep dive into the platform, see how it works out for you, and let me know in case let us know. We're there in the chat always to support. So we would be happy to help at any point of time in case you get any confusion, right? So that is it from my side. And yeah, one thing I would like to highlight here is you get 100 minutes of free automation testing once you sign up. So make sure you go ahead and see the platform yourself. Having said that, long-awaited Q&A. We've had a lot of questions with us already. Some of them we tried to answer in the middle of the session, but we were just being time sensitive. So now we're going to address them as it is. Yeah. So Patrick, over to you. Do you think? Yeah.
So
do you think?
Which one?
I'll shoot one. I have this one right from the beginning. Yeah. So I noticed this question even before I started presenting. So do you think that automation testing can be the responsibility of the developers, or is it essential to have separate positions?
I think it's not essential to have separate positions, but have a think for a few minutes about this, because personally, I'm not sure how many things I can be really good at the same time, right? And I think in most situations, the combination of having a different person, it's also bringing a different perspective to the problem, like the context switch that happens from, writing application code to writing integration tests and swapping back again. Like, that's a little bit jarring for me personally, and you have to ask, do you gain anything by amalgamating those two things together? They're both work that you want to get done. Any team involves division of labor. Somebody's going to do X bit, somebody else is going to do Y bit, somebody else is going to do Z bit. I think in general terms, I think it's optimal to have different people doing those roles. I think that's an optimal situation. Because it allows the people who are working on the integration tests in particular and other forms of test automation to really specialize and focus on that and become very expert and very fast at it, ideally, and produce high quality test code. Whereas if you're trying to write application code and the integration test code at the same time and think about things like performance, it's pretty hard to be good at all of those things at the same time and to be good and fast at all of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's essential to have separate people, but I think it's overall a better situation usually.
Got it. And I will take the next question from Yogesh, who already has a LambdaTest license. And he says that if there is a video base where I can learn all the capabilities or functionalities of LambdaTest apart from browser testing them manually. So yes, Yogesh, as I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, we have a YouTube channel in place where we keep uploading product demos and in generic videos around test automation space, right? So I'll just quickly drop that session here. So you can pretty much go ahead and go to our channel, LambdaTest, subscribe to it there, and you'll be able to find a dedicated code base. I'll just drop it in the chat so everybody can have a look at it. And in case you have any suggestions, in case we're not able to help you in any way, if you feel that the video is not there, the one that you're looking for any particular framework or anything, as I said, we are always available on the chat window. You can drop us a message and we'll take it from there. All right. So Next question is from Kiran. Any thoughts and best practices to encourage traditional project to have shift left mindset?
The implication in the question there is that they don't currently have a shift left mindset, right? Yeah. Okay. Their lean and shift left approach has been going on for about 20 years plus, right? So if they haven't noticed at this point, then they need some trigger or some form of encouragement to start to notice. Yeah. I would highly recommend encouraging your management to attend something like the Certified Scrum Master training, where they could typically cover a lot of the history, right? If you can possibly get them to do that, because they'll cover the history of things like the Toyota production system in those courses, and how those approaches apply to software development and what the advantages are. And, if they haven't stepped onto this path already, it might take a lot of persuading, and they might be more open to an external expert voice in the field in an area that's really growing, right? So I think one of the most effective things I would try to do is get them to sign up for the Certified Scrum Master course if they haven't done it already, especially if that's your management. Yeah, those guys will help them open their eyes. If you haven't persuaded them, get somebody else to do the persuading.
Yeah,
and buy them Eric Ries's book. As shameless plug, buy the Lean Startup and make them read it. It's easy to read.
Yeah, and I would just like to address Nazima's question as well, because it's pretty much similar to, Nazima is asking if we can showcase Selenium, how it behaves, and how to start automating with it. So the focus of this webinar in particular is not to deep dive into the code side of things on Selenium, but we have had previous webinars conducted where we have started, developing Selenium scripts from scratch. We also have tutorials available on the channel, so you can have a look at there and see how it works out for you. And in case you get stuck at any point, let us know. We'll be happy to help. We have one question: how do we import our automation tests into LambdaTest? So, all right, yeah, this is a good question, and let me just go ahead and showcase that here. So, it's more or less, it's pretty basic. Once you have your automation scripts with you, you need to make 3 changes to your code line. You need to just incorporate your username in there to address. You need to incorporate a remote web driver, which should address your LambdaTest username, your LambdaTest access key as the path. And once you have that authenticated, you will need to define capabilities, as we highlighted early on. Through the capability generator, you can go ahead and get that class and incorporate that capabilities class in your code set. And once you run that is all you need to do in order to plug your test on LambdaTest, irrespective of which framework you're using. We have the capability generator developed for making the process easier and handy, and you can find it across different languages. So irrespective of which language you use, be it or which Selenium version you're using, even if it's the latest Selenium 4, we've got you covered. And of course, as I said, we have 24/7 chat support, so you can reach out to us at any point in case you're struggling to run up your first automation test. We'll be happy to help you with that. Yeah. All right. So does LambdaTest support Cypress? Yes, it does. As I mentioned, this is a Cypress test here, as you see. And we've run it across 2 different browsers. As I was talking about parallel testing, yeah, you can leverage the same test. You can run the same test across different browsers at the same time, right? And we do have an error here. Mind my programming skills, but in many cases, we can go ahead and, even if it's an error, you can go ahead and actually see if there is something running there or not, right? And this is an entirely Cypress test over here that you see. So you'll find that segregation on the timeline as well. Cypress tests are highlighted with the Cypress logo there. So thank you very much. Bonnie says, if you have a minute, can you share the link to book you just referred? I seem to miss it. My connection broke up. Oh, all right.
Eric Ries, The Lean Startup. It's an easy read. It's fun. It's a very famous book. I shouldn't be, recommending other people's books on this show, but it's a good one if you want to encourage people to think about lean approaches and the advantages that they're going to have. It's a really easy read. Everyone should read it.
Yeah, probably it's best if you can just type that entirely in the chat. Yeah. I think that would be helpful for everyone. Thanks. And Obed is asking if LambdaTest is supporting mobile automation test. Yeah. So as of now, we do have APM capabilities which you can leverage to, test your mobile website, but mobile application automation is still being worked upon, and probably it's going to be on board very soon. Yeah. So apart from that, I think we've pretty much covered everything. I hope I haven't missed any question here. Yeah, looks like we've got everything covered. In case anybody has any further questions, feel free to drop them, and I will just go to the slides again. So this is
yeah, so this is me again, guys. This is the short story for anyone with any level of interest, right? I think we covered most of this, the intro. I've been around for 20 years, so I'm exactly as old as I look, I hope. I've managed all kinds of different teams. I spent a lot of time, on tooling systems and building things to support engineering teams, right? Build systems, environment provisioning systems, all that kind of crack. And now I'm with Teckro, who are a clinical trial software company, which, it's in the news. It's a growth area, and it's a really good company with a really good bunch of engineers. And we are hiring like mad. So all through this year and into next year, we have like really serious hiring plans. So if you're in the market, we have offices in Ireland. We have offices in Poland. If you're in the market and you're looking for a place to be and you want to come and work with some really good engineers on some really good projects, please drop me a line or give us a call. We're going to be hiring all the way through 2022, and I guarantee you it will be a good trip.
Awesome. That would be the end of it. And thank you so much, Patrick, for taking time out of your busy schedule. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm sure, we've had some good feedbacks in the chat as well. People have appreciated the entire presentation. So kudos. I believe everybody is going to think differently when it comes to shift left testing and how they go about implementing that organization-wide, right? I for sure have had a lot of learning for myself, and I can second that. I think the audience can second that for me. And thanks for being here, Yuan, Thomas, everybody who's participated in the Q&A. It was great set of questions that we had to take up. And again, Ashish is asking what's the name of the book. I guess
it's further up.
So it's there in the chat window, Ashish, if you could just scroll up. But yeah, it's the Lean Startup, right? Yeah. And having said that, thank you so much, Patrick. Would you like to address to the audience too?
Thank you very much, everybody. It's been great having you here and really nice talking to you. Have a very good evening. And I hope you're all good. Good night.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.